The bathroom door wouldn't break, no matter how hard James Haven kicked it, and on the other side, his sister Angelina Jolie, the woman who had survived war zones and refugee camps, was silent for the first time in 48 hours. The pills were already dissolving in her system when he finally broke through, finding her collapsed against the Italian marble that had seemed so important when she'd bought this Beverly Hills sanctuary. But nothing about luxury mattered now, not after what their father had just done on national television. Not after Jon Voight had looked into the camera and told the world his daughter was mentally ill, unstable, and needed help. The betrayal had been so public, so calculated, that even Angelina Jolie, who had built a career on being unbreakable, had finally shattered. It had started 2 days earlier, on Thursday morning. Angelina was making breakfast for 2-year-old Maddox, her newly adopted son from Cambodia. The boy was laughing at cartoons while she ignored her constantly buzzing phone. The media always wanted statements about her split from Billy Bob Thornton, but ignoring those calls was a mistake that would haunt her forever. It was her publicist who finally got through, calling the landline something she only did in absolute emergencies. Her voice was careful, too careful, the way people speak when they're about to deliver news that will change everything. "Angelina, you need to turn on Access Hollywood, right now. I'm feeding Maddox. Can it wait?" "No, it can't. Your father, Jon, is on the show." The name alone made her stomach tighten. She hadn't spoken to Jon Voight in over a year, not since he'd tried to ambush her at a public event, showing up uninvited and making a scene about being kept from his grandchildren he had never actually attempted to know. Their relationship had been fractured since she was a child, when he had left her mother for a younger woman, but she had tried, God knows she had tried, to bridge that gap. Every attempt had ended in manipulation, in him selling stories to tabloids, in him using her fame to resurrect his own fading career. But this, what she was about to see, this was different. She turned on the television, switching from the cartoon bears to Access Hollywood, and there he was. Jon Voight, Academy Award winner, sitting across from Pat O'Brien, wearing the concerned expression of a loving father. But Angelina knew that face. It was the same one he wore when he was about to deliver a performance, when he was about to make the audience believe something that would benefit him. "I'm here because I'm worried about my daughter," Jon was saying, his voice breaking with practiced emotion. "Angelina is seriously mentally ill. She's suffering from serious emotional problems, and she won't get help." The room tilted. Maddox was still in his high chair, babbling happily, unaware that his mother's world was collapsing in real time on national television. Jon continued, each word a carefully placed dagger. "I've tried to reach out, to help her, but she's cut me off completely. I'm afraid for her, and I'm afraid for her son. She's not stable enough to be raising a child alone." The implications were clear, devastatingly clear. He wasn't just calling her mentally ill, he was questioning her fitness as a mother, potentially giving ammunition to anyone who might want to challenge her adoption of Maddox. In countries where international adoption was already controversial, where a single woman adopting was already viewed with suspicion, this could be catastrophic, but he wasn't done. The interview had been carefully orchestrated, each revelation timed for maximum impact. "She's always had these problems," Jon said, shaking his head sadly. "Even as a child she was difficult, prone to dark moods and self-harm. Her mother and I tried everything, but Angelina has always been different, disturbed even." This was a lie so profound that Angelina actually gasped. Her mother had been the one stable presence in her life after Jon abandoned them. Her mother had never once called her disturbed. And now Jon was using her dead mother, Marceline had passed away just months ago, as a weapon. But the worst revelation was yet to come. "I saw signs of it on the set of Lara Croft," Jon continued, name-dropping the film that had made Angelina a global star. "She would have these episodes, these breaks from reality. The crew was concerned. Everyone could see something was wrong, but she refuses to acknowledge it." Another lie. Angelina had been nothing but professional on that set, had performed her own stunts, had never missed a day of filming. But who would contradict Jon Voight, the respected actor, the concerned father? Who would believe her over him? Pat O'Brien was nodding sympathetically. "What do you think she needs, Jon?" "Professional help. Serious psychiatric intervention. I'm considering I may have to take legal action for the sake of my grandson." There it was, the threat. The man who had abandoned his own children was positioning himself as savior. But Angelina didn't know the real bombshell was still coming. The interview continued for another 10 minutes. Jon talked about her relationship with James, implying something inappropriate. He mentioned her blood vial necklace, the knife collection, reframing every unconventional choice as mental illness. When it ended, Angelina was on the floor, Maddox fussing in his abandoned breakfast. What happened in the next 24 hours would push her to the edge. The phone started ringing immediately. Every line, every cell phone, all of them screaming for her attention. She could imagine the callers, agents, publicists, studio executives, all wanting to know how she would respond, how she would manage this crisis. But there were other calls too, ones that terrified her more. Lawyers, she was sure, social workers perhaps. People who now had reason to question whether Angelina Jolie, Academy Award winner and new mother, was fit to raise a child. She managed to get Maddox out of his chair, holding him close, breathing in his baby smell, trying to ground herself in this reality. She was a mother, she was stable, she was not what Jon Voight said she was. But even as she held her son, she could feel the doubt creeping in. What if he was right? What if there was something fundamentally broken in her? What if she was the disaster he painted her to be? James arrived within an hour. Her brother found her in Maddox's nursery, staring at nothing while the baby played. "I saw it," he said. "It's all over the news." He said, "Mom thought I was disturbed," Angelina whispered. "He used Mom." James's face darkened. Their mother had died less than 6 months ago from ovarian cancer. For Jon to invoke her now, to use her memory as a weapon, it was unconscionable. But neither of them knew how much worse things were about to get. "You know it's not true," James said, kneeling beside the rocking chair. "Everything he said, it's all lies." But Angelina wasn't listening anymore. She was thinking about the implications, the dominoes that were already falling. She had films in production, contracts worth millions. Would the studios still trust her? She had humanitarian work planned, trips to refugee camps where she was supposed to be a voice for the voiceless. Would the UN still want her representing them? And Maddox, God, Maddox. Would Cambodia review the adoption? Would American authorities get involved? "He's trying to destroy me," she said, her voice hollow. And he might succeed. The next 24 hours were hell. Her publicist released a brief statement, but the media wanted blood. Every channel ran Jon's interview on repeat. Experts debated her mental health. Previous interviews were dissected for signs of instability. Her self-harm admission, her tattoos, her marriages, everything became evidence of the madness her father diagnosed. Then came the call that broke her completely. A studio executive called directly. "Angelina, we need to know if you're okay to continue with your next film. The insurance company wants a psychiatric evaluation." A psychiatric evaluation, because her estranged father had called her crazy on television. That night, alone after James left and Maddox slept, Angelina stood in her bathroom staring at the sleeping pills prescribed after her mother's death. She poured them into her hand, more than enough. As she raised them to her mouth, Maddox cried out in his sleep. For a moment she hesitated. But what came next shocked even her. She swallowed the pills dry, all of them, then sat on the bathroom floor against the cool tile. She couldn't write a note. What would she say? That her father had won? That she was sorry for not being the daughter he wanted? Here's the part nobody knows about that night. James felt something wrong, twin instinct perhaps, though they weren't twins. He turned his car around, breaking traffic laws to return. He had a key, found her bedroom empty, saw the bathroom light. The door was locked. She wasn't responding. Her breathing was wrong, too slow, too shallow. He called 911 while throwing his shoulder against the door. The door gave way just as paramedics arrived. Angelina was unconscious but alive. They pumped her stomach on the bathroom floor, James holding her hand, whispering, "Don't let him win." She woke in Cedars-Sinai, throat raw, head foggy. James was there, exhausted. When she asked about Maddox, he assured her the baby was safe with the nanny, knew nothing. But then something unexpected happened. Dr. Lisa Goldstein, one of LA's top psychiatrists, arrived. This wasn't just about the interview, was it? Surprisingly, Angelina talked about Jon's cruelty, her mother's death, the pressure of fame, about the fear that everyone secretly agreed with Jon, that she was too damaged to be loved, too broken to mother a child. "Your father is a narcissist," Dr. Goldstein said bluntly. This was emotional violence, deliberate as any physical attack. You need to fight back, not with words but by living well. Wait until you hear who called next. Brad Pitt called James, offering support and to make a statement if needed. They'd only worked together on Mr. and Mrs. Smith, weren't romantically involved yet, but he understood having your personal life weaponized. Then Billy Bob Thornton called from Canada. "You're not crazy, Angie. You feel deeply, live authentically. That's not mental illness, that's courage. Don't let him make you doubt yourself." She cried then, for the first time since taking the pills. For the little girl who just wanted daddy's love. For Maddox, who almost lost his mother to her father's cruelty. But the story doesn't end there, it gets even more shocking. During her 72-hour hold, she did therapy, met other patients fighting their own battles. When released, she went straight to Maddox. He toddled over, "Mama," and she made a promise never to let Jon or anyone drive her to abandon this child. The aftermath was complex. The media had caught wind of her hospitalization. Jon played the concerned father, but public perception was shifting. Other celebrities spoke out about parental betrayal. Mental health advocates condemned public shaming. Angelina stayed quiet for months, going to therapy, learning about narcissistic abuse. The real response came through her work, becoming a UN Goodwill ambassador, adopting Zahara, making films that mattered. She never spoke publicly about the suicide attempt until years later, when she had 6 children and had proven her fitness as a mother beyond doubt. "I lost myself for a moment," she would say, "but I found my way back." Jon continued his campaign for years, interviews, showing up at her premieres uninvited, using her fame for his career. But something had broken that night on Access Hollywood. You can forgive many things, but not a parent who tries to destroy you for gain. But here's the most powerful part of this story. The Beverly Hills bathroom was renovated. She couldn't stand looking at where she almost died. Years later, after refugee camps, adoptions, and 3 biological children with Brad Pitt, that desperate woman felt like a stranger. But she had existed, had almost won. Only James saved her, breaking down the door, refusing to let their father claim another victim. The scar wasn't visible like her teenage cutting scars. This was internal, a reminder of the edge and the fight to come back. It made her stronger, more protective of her children, determined never to be the parent Jon was. Years later, Jon would attempt reconciliation, claiming change and regret, but Angelina had learned the difference between remorse and manipulation. Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, but on that night in 2002, when she was 27 and broken on a bathroom floor, she knew none of this. All she knew was pain so acute it felt like dying might be the only way to make it stop. All she knew was betrayal so profound that it poisoned every good memory, every moment of thinking maybe her father had loved her after all. All she knew was that she had failed to be the daughter Jon wanted, failed to be strong enough to withstand his cruelty, failed to protect her son from potentially losing his mother. The pills had been a surrender, an admission that Jon Voight had won, that his version of her crazy, unstable, unfit was the truth. But the stomach pump and the IVs and the 72-hour hold were a different kind of admission that she wanted to live, even if she hadn't in that moment. That somewhere beneath the pain and humiliation and fear was a will to survive that even her father's calculated cruelty couldn't extinguish. The interview that almost killed her became, paradoxically, the thing that freed her. After that, she knew the worst thing Jon could do, and she had survived it. After that, his opinion of her ceased to matter in any real way. He had played his ultimate card, public humiliation and the threat to take her child, and she was still standing. Scarred, changed, but standing. When she finally did speak about that period years later, she was careful not to give Jon what he had always wanted, centrality in her narrative. She spoke instead about the pressure of public life, the weight of others' expectations, the challenge of defining yourself when powerful people want to define you differently. She spoke about mental health without confirming or denying the suicide attempt, protecting that private pain while acknowledging the struggle. "Sometimes you lose yourself," she said. "Sometimes the noise becomes so loud you can't hear your own voice anymore. The important thing is to find your way back, to remember who you are beneath what everyone says you are." What she didn't say was that everyone had been her father, that the noise had been his voice on national television, telling the world she was insane. What she didn't say was that finding her way back had required having her stomach pumped in a Beverly Hills emergency room, while her brother held her hand and begged her not to leave him alone with the legacy of Jon Voight's damage. But those who knew, knew. James knew. Every time he looked at his sister and remembered the weight of her unconscious body as he carried her to the paramedics. Her therapist knew, having guided her through the aftermath and helped her rebuild her sense of self from the ground up. And somewhere, perhaps, Jon Voight knew that his attempt to destroy his daughter had almost succeeded, and that her survival was not forgiveness but defiance. The house in Beverly Hills was eventually sold. Too many memories, too many ghosts. The new owners probably never knew that in the beautifully renovated bathroom, a woman had once tried to die because her father's cruelty had finally become unbearable. They probably never knew that the peaceful garden visible from the master bedroom window had been the last thing she thought she'd see. But Maddox knew. Eventually, when he was old enough to understand and to ask why he had no grandfather, Angelina told him the truth, that sometimes people who should love you don't know how, that sometimes protecting yourself means letting go of toxic relationships, even with family. What she didn't tell him was that his grandfather had once tried to take him away, had used him as a weapon against her. The story could have ended differently. If James hadn't turned around, if the door had been stronger, if she had taken just a few more pills, Jon Voight would have given tearful interviews about his troubled daughter, positioning himself as the grieving father who had tried to warn everyone. He would have monetized her tragedy, built his comeback on her grave. Instead, she lived to adopt 5 more children and give them the unconditional love she had never received. Lived to become a director, telling stories of survival and resilience. Lived to stand before the United Nations and speak for refugees and victims of war. Lived to prove that Jon Voight had been wrong about everything. But she also lived with the knowledge of how close she had come. Every triumph was shadowed by that memory, every achievement a quiet defiance of the narrative Jon had tried to write for her. The pills had been meant to be an ending, but they had become a beginning, the start of a life lived entirely on her own terms. Years passed, Jon aged, his career faded, his interviews about Angelina became repetitive and ignored. She grew stronger, more successful, more influential. The power dynamic shifted completely. He needed her fame to stay relevant, while she needed nothing from him at all. The woman who walked out of Cedars-Sinai after her 72-hour hold was not the same one who had been carried in unconscious. She was someone who had looked at death and chosen life, who had faced her father's cruelty and chosen to survive it. She was Angelina Jolie, and she was enough, had always been enough, despite what Jon Voight had tried to make the world believe. The story ends not with reconciliation, but with liberation, not with forgiveness, but with freedom, not with Jon Voight's approval, but with the knowledge that she had never needed it. She lived to prove that sometimes the best revenge against someone who tries to kill you, literally or figuratively, is simply to refuse to die.